Hello everybody, it's Gary Hall Sr. at the Race Club in Coronado, California with my producer, Coach Thomas Henson. Welcome to our YouTube broadcast, and this week we've got a really good show for you, and we're going to discuss the pulling motion in freestyle. This is actually the first time we've really taken a deep dive into the pulling motion of freestyle to try to evaluate what the cost is to a swimmer of making mistakes on the pull. We all see them as coaches or swimmers. We know we're making mistakes, but we don't always know how badly those mistakes are hurting us. So in this show, we're going to analyze the pulling motion of Olympian Artem Makakin. Artem was an Olympian from Belarus, swam a 48 plus 100 meter freestyle in a relay, very strong swimmer. And what we did is we asked Artem to swim in his normal technique, his sprint technique, and then we asked in each study after that to make one single mistake. Now sometimes he did a little better job making the mistake with one hand, the other will point that out, but he does a good job of making the mistake each time, not necessarily with both hands, but at least one hand where we can really capture that mistake, measure the cost of that mistake. And then in the end, we're gonna rank all of his swims with the mistakes according to which one hurt him the most and which one the least. And keep in mind, we didn't know going into this how badly each of these mistakes would cost him, but now we have a better idea of what mistakes cost a swimmer how much. So let's start with his normal technique. Now, the one thing I will tell you, and every time we do the studies, and this is one of the first studies where we actually look at him side by side with two technologies. This is the very same swim, and this is his normal freestyle technique as he's coming into the screen here. You see him on the right. He's actually swimming the same 20 meters or 25 yards here on the right and the left. But you see two different graphs. On the right, you see a green curve on the top. That denotes his velocity from 0 up to almost 3 meters per second. In the white lines, you'll see the y-axis over on the far right side of the screen. Below, the orange curve is this acceleration and deceleration, which is different than the velocity. When he's accelerating, that means his propulsion is greater than his drag. And when he's decelerating, the drag is greater than the propulsion. And how far up above the curve he goes is an indication of how much propulsion he's getting, and how far below the curve he goes when he's decelerating is an indication of how much drag there is at that point. On the left side, you'll see a red curve and a white curve. Now the white curve denotes his right hand. Easy to remember, white rhymes with right. The red curve is his left hand. And you notice they'll be a little bit different from one side to the other. Also, you'll see three different graphs here. One is the propulsive forces. What that means is the force pressing backward, which is the one that makes him go forward. Newton's third law of motion, action, reaction. So the propulsion is force backward. Then on the top right, you have a lateral force. This is the lateral force here, propulsion down here. And then the vertical forces, the lateral forces are the outsweep and the insweep. And we want to minimize those because they don't really make us go faster. They actually kind of impede our propulsion, as you'll see in some of these studies. And then the vertical force is how much we're pressing down at the beginning of the pull and how much we're pressing up at the end of the pull. The downward force lifts the body up in the water, reduces drag. There's a beneficial effect to that. The upward force, no, there's no benefit to that. In fact, it's probably hurting us by pressing our body down. So in Artem's normal technique, we'll start with this, we found 3 flaws in his technique. So we haven't found any swimmer, even the Olympians yet, where they're not making some mistakes. So we'll start with his right hand. Now you notice right here that his wrist is flexed slightly, which it should be at the beginning of the freestyle pull. There's a little bit bend here on what we call flexion, but right in here you'll see him dorsiflex, and it goes from flexion to dorsiflexion. But if you look over here on the vertical forces, you see that his pressure pressing down, and when he's below the white, or the white line here, or the green line, the white curve is his right hand, pressing down with 70 newtons of force over here. But look at his propulsion. Unlike his left hand, which spikes up to here, he never gets really high in the propulsion with his right hand because he's pressing down more than he is backward. So that was mistake number 1. Then we went to his left hand, and the left propulsion is definitely better. You see here he's flexed, which is what we want to see early in the pull. But here he straightens. He doesn't go backwards. He doesn't feather, as we call it, with the wrist. So he holds on better, and as a result, you see the propulsion goes much higher on the left hand. But here's the problem he has with the left. Now he is in sweeping. He turns that left hand inward. You see the inward force goes way up here, and he loses that propulsion quickly. So unlike the right hand, which sustains the pressure or the force on the water longer, his left hand comes up, and then it comes right back down. And then he also doesn't dorsiflex the wrist at the end of the pull here. So again, he loses propulsion. His force is mostly upward here and not backward. So those are the three mistakes that we found in his normal technique. And then we asked him to go to the mistakes. So we started with an outsweep, and we'll go to that next. Before we get to his outsweep, I will say that most of the outsweep problems we see, and they're often in young women or girls, it's usually at the beginning of the pull, right after the hand enters the water. Then you see this huge outsweep pressing out of the hand, where the hand goes outside the elbow before it has to turn back in. And whenever there's a big outsweep, there has to be followed by an insweep. So you not only have one problem, but you create two problems. So the outsweep here that Artyom does isn't really as prominent in at the time we normally see it. He's actually doing the outsweep at a different time, and you'll see it here in a second with his right hand as he comes in. Okay, so there he's in sweeping right there, but right in here, back here, is where he outsweeps. He's pressing out with the right hand out to the side. So what do we see? And right there he's pressing out, and you see the lateral forces right here go up to about 40 newtons of force. But you see what happens to his propulsion curve when he outsweeps is it flattens it out. He's also still got that dorsiflexion, so he now has a lot of downward force, but he also adds some lateral force. He doesn't get as much propulsion. Then he grabs a hold again. There's a little bit of an in-sweep right there. You see the hand in-sweeping, gets a pretty good level of propulsion, and then he loses it at the end. So his outsweep is definitely worse on in this test. He does it more effectively with his right hand. His left hand, he really doesn't outsweep very much. This is the outsweep right here with the left, right here with the left hand. And it's not very high. So he's not outsweeping as much, but the outsweep that he achieves here with the right hand right there is significant. All right, and so we don't want to outsweep. It doesn't benefit us at all, and it then leads to an insweep, which is really detrimental. All right, so this was a study that we did of his insweep, and I'm going to bring him into the picture here in a second. Remember he insweeped pretty significantly with his left hand when he was doing his normal technique, but you actually see him insweep here with the right hand a little bit more than he does with the left. So in this study, he wasn't insweeping hardly at all with the right hand. Before he does insweep here, you can see the force that's up here, the result of the insweep. But look how much of a loss of velocity occurs over here because of that insweep, not holding on. But with the right hand now, you can see there the palm of the hand facing the camera. Look at the lateral forces, almost 70 newtons of force here, 65 probably. Tremendous. Again, he doesn't get the increase in velocity that we would expect during the strong part of the pull. Biomechanically, he's at a strong point, coupling here, but we don't see this increase in the speed. I want to highlight the differences between the left hand. Remember, we see 3 peaks of velocity with each arm pull in a sprint freestyle. So this was peak 1 with the left hand, peak 2, peak 3. He builds on those peaks, and even though he insweeps a little bit, he still grabs a hold and really keeps a hold of the water. And we like to see that elevation of the velocity through the pulling motion. But look what happens with the right. So here's peak 1, which is significantly lower than it was with the left hand here. This is the right hand. Probably because he's pressing down. Again, we see that vertical force over here, the right hand. Now peak 2 is significantly lower than peak 2 with the left hand. Again, because he's in sweeping, this is the in sweep here of the right hand, doesn't get as much increase in velocity. And then peak 3 here, also lower. So when you look at the average peaks and troughs, you see a better average here with his left hand than with the right hand. And primarily it's because of this huge in sweep right here. Again, you look at the propulsion with the in sweep, he just doesn't get very high with the right hand, and he doesn't sustain it quite as well as he did with his normal technique. All right, so let's go down to the next study we did. And these are all pretty common mistakes that we see. This is called the elevated hand in the middle. And what happens is, in order to get propulsion in freestyle, the hand has to drop down, usually about 2 feet underwater, depending on the size of the swimmer, the length of the arm, before it can really move backwards. And anatomically, the shoulder has to internally rotate. But you have to go deeper into the water than you do in backstroke. So he has to go down, and then if he's going down and to release the hand, he has to get back up. So the question is, there's always going to be the pressing down. That's going to create lift at the beginning of the pull, which is not a bad thing. But where is that elevation occurring, and how quickly is that elevation occurring? Because some swimmers will have a very sudden elevation of their hand, and it's almost like they let go. I make the analogy of hanging on a pull-up bar with one arm, and your hand starts to slip, and you say, well, I'm going to re-grab it. So you let go to try to re-grab, and you find yourself on the ground. Well, that's what happens in the freestyle pull when you let go. So watch his left hand here. He's pressing back right there. You see him up the hand. It almost comes straight up. And during that time, look at the velocity, how much velocity he loses over here on the right, because now he's going to let go, and he's not going to get that same kind of elevation of velocity he had with the other technique. Look at how in the propulsion, the curve just takes a nosedive here. He has a little bit of in sweep. That was something he was doing always. That's continuing. But he certainly loses velocity as a result of letting go or lifting that hand. Here's that dorsiflexion again that we see in every stroke he takes. But watch right here. You see how that hand right there, if I go back, you can look at it, you can see it. Okay, pressing backward, inward as well, and now sliding upward. And look what happens to the velocity curve. No build. It should be popping up here over 2 meters per second. He doesn't get there because he just let go of the chin-up bar, and he's not on the ground, but he's not gaining speed the way he should. Same thing over here on the propulsion side. He was building, and then boom, it's over. He doesn't continue to build on his propulsion. And so there's actually a pretty good elevation in both hands with this technique. He does the mistake pretty well both times. Probably a little bit better in the right. And you see, because of that, you see a lower impulse or average propulsion on the right than the left. So not good. And how do you overcome that? Well, you just have to elevate more gradually. You don't stop, lift, and then press again. You press backward and elevate at the same time. And there's an art to doing that, because you have to elevate, but you don't want to come straight up with the hand and cause a sudden loss of propulsion. And we did this one, which was pressing up at the end. And I first saw this with Margot Gear when we analyzed her a few years ago with the pressure meter. And I noticed she really pressed upward as opposed to backward at the end of the pull. And if you look at with his left hand here as he comes up, and he kind of curling his fingers around here, you see this big vertical force upward with the left hand, with the red curve. And again, because of that, the velocity goes, this is the third peak, and it's not as high as it was before, but he loses that velocity. Instead of pressing out the back, the force is more upward, and he loses that velocity quickly. Ignore this curve right here because he kicked the string. Whenever you see this huge acceleration and big jump like that, that's artifact, it's not real. Okay, right here he presses upward. Not so much with the right hand. He does a much better job with the left hand pressing upward. See if we can capture one more. Okay, right here you can see the peak vertical force right about there, here. And you can actually see the angle of his hand as he's coming up, again causing this precipitous loss of velocity. And he is building on that speed, but he built higher speed when he didn't push up at the end. He doesn't hold on to that speed, the propulsion. You can see it drops really quickly, and as a result he loses speed. All right, so let's take a look at oh, we have one more, the early release. I forgot, we do have one that I forgot about. This is a really important one because sometimes we have to ask the question, what is more important, to have a higher stroke rate or to press out the back and slow the stroke rate down? It's not an easy answer because in some cases the higher stroke rate with the early release leads to a higher velocity, and sometimes it leads to a lower velocity. So in this case with Artyom, where he was more of a 100 swimmer and used to pressing out the back, and he presses out the back better with his right hand than he does with his left hand with this normal technique. But when we had him release early, definitely lost velocity at the end, and you definitely lost velocity overall. If you can see his left hand as he comes in here, he's got a pretty good grip, but his propulsion is starting to lessen quickly, and then he turns the hand right there and lets go, and you see that propulsion go quickly down to zero. Again, we lose a lot of velocity right from here to here at the end, and some of this velocity here is because of a strong kick, not because he's really getting much out of the end of his pull. There's just no propulsion at that point. We've watched his right hand. There's that downward force again. Okay, here now, instead of pressing out the back, we see him release, and at this point with the right white curve, there's no vertical force. He's not pressing upward, he's not pressing inward or outward, and his propulsion has basically gone down to zero. So you see he's really just let go completely. There's no force in any direction. And there again we see, as a result of that, his velocity was here, and it immediately drops down to 1.5. So by not holding on at the end, he's dropping. His speed is dropping more. We didn't know how this would play out, but on this higher stroke rate, he went to 125, which is pretty high for him, 125 strokes per minute. And his normal technique, he was around 115, so a significantly higher stroke rate. But now let's go to the analysis of each mistake and look at that, and we'll talk about how it's affecting his overall speed. So we ranked normal technique. We didn't know if normal technique was going to end up being as fast as it turned out it did. It was at 1.956 meters per second. This was over 10 meters of analysis. We took it over a pretty long period of time. Stroke rate was 115. Cycle time, if you're more into that, is 1.04. The second fastest swim he did was the in-sweep. It's not surprising here because he does an in-sweep with his normal technique, but when he in-sweep here, he actually in-swept with both hands. But that extra in-sweep with the right now cost him a little bit. He went down to 1.922, same exact stroke rate, same exact cycle time. So really comparing apples to apples in terms of stroke rates. Then we did an outsweep. Again, it wasn't the typical outsweep. It was more of a middle of the pull outsweep. Right after he turned the hand down or started to push back, he would press out. And he lost, again, considerable amount of speed with almost the same cycle time or stroke rate. And he dropped down to 1.898 meters per second. It's still his third fastest swim. The fourth fastest, when he increased his stroke rate up to 125, released the hand early, as we saw, but didn't end up as fast as when he pressed out the back here with his normal technique. So the early release cost him. He went down to 1.892, and pretty significant drop from at least up here down to here. The two worst in terms of his overall speed were when he pressed up with his hand at the end. Again, he did it a little bit more effectively with the left hand than he did with the right. His stroke rate at this time really dropped down, and this might have contributed to him being slower, but he went from 115 almost down 10 strokes per minute here at 106, with a significantly slower average speed. And the worst of all was that when he let go in the middle of the pull, elevating his hand in the middle, and again, lower stroke rates can account for some of this, but 1.086 meters per second was the average speed. So we went from 1.956 down to 1.806. So what does that mean in terms of his, if you were swimming a 50-meter sprint all out, and he kept these techniques all the way down the pool, and for Artyom, he's about a 22-second 50 guy, so that means he's swimming for 18 seconds. So based on 18 seconds of swimming time, if he inswept the way he did here, he would end up 0.61 meters behind his normal sprint technique. Time-wise, I don't know exactly what that would be, but it would be a couple of tenths of a second. Here, when he outswept, he'd be a meter behind where he would have been. With the early release, he would have been 1.15 meters behind. Pressing up at the end with a slower stroke rate, 1.73 meters behind. And the hand elevating in the middle, almost 3 meters behind, which would have been at least a half a second, probably more than that. It's a big difference in time. The important thing is all of these mistakes in his technique hurt him to one degree or another. The hand elevating in the middle was the worst. Pressing up at the end was second worst. Going higher stroke rate with a catch and release stroke was next, and then the outsweep and insweep. But they all cost him at least 0.6 meters compared to this difference in position in the pool. That's enough to win or lose the race. So you have to really pay attention to the details. Unfortunately, we can't always catch these mistakes being made from the deck, and that's why we have this great technology, and it helps us to identify outward forces, inward forces, downward forces, upward forces, and backward forces. And then over here, we get to actually measure the effect of those. How much speed does he lose because of the mistake that's being made? So that's it. I would say take these mistakes seriously. You have to learn how to grip the water, as Aaron Pearsall used to say, grip it and rip it, and you have to not let go. And we see a lot of swimmers, even the Olympians, either letting go or not grabbing a hold or not pressing in the right direction through the duration of the pull. All right, we'll open it up for questions at this time. Thank you. Okay, we've got some questions that are coming in, and please ask anything you want. It doesn't even have to pertain to the pulling motion, although we find this subject fascinating because to our knowledge, no one's ever measured with the technology that we have these 5 different or 6 different mistakes that are pretty commonly made. And the discouraging part is that, and when I see things happening, I realize, oh my gosh, I didn't really catch that. I didn't see him doing that. They happen so quickly that it's very hard to see them from the deck when they do happen, unless they're very obvious. And then we don't really know for sure how much or how badly they're hurting the swimmer until we can measure them. Fortunately, we have that technology, can do that here at the race club. And with Artyom, it doesn't necessarily, the the cost of each of those mistakes isn't necessarily the same for every swimmer. So when you see the outsweep or insweep or whatever that's ranked in that order, may be different. It's just for him, that was how badly it hurt his overall technique and his velocity. Another question, and as more questions are coming in now, but another question that you may have, or I would certainly have, is how do I fix these problems? If I recognize them, if I'm lucky enough to see him doing that, how do we do that? And I will answer this we put out some great series on the pulling motion for those of you who are on our lane 2 or lane 3. Mostly they're in lane 3. Lane 3 subscription is the incomplete library. But it goes through some drills where we show you how to work on the front quadrant, the middle section of the pull. It's really not a quadrant, it's the middle, starting at the first third of the pull, the middle third of the pull, and the end of the pull, using one arm at a time. So we can really, if the problem is like elevating the hand in the middle, or at the beginning it's outsweeping or insweeping, you can work on that part of the pull with these drills and really try to get that part of the pull right, and then go to the other parts of the pull. We also love the one-arm drill where once we do all 3 sections of the pull, then we go to the complete pull all the way through. I had a master swimmer here a couple weeks ago who lives up in Palm Springs, not too far. He drives down. It's just really starting to get fast and making a lot of mistakes on her pulling motion. But we did that. We stopped, started at the beginning, stopped before the shoulder, went back underwater, worked on the beginning, then we worked on the middle, then we worked on the end, then we put it all together, and she did really beautifully, improved tremendously. All right, let's go to some questions. We've got FPS Croatia. Thanks. Shout out to Croatia. I have a lot of friends in Croatia. We trained Dewey Draganyan back in 2004 for the Olympics, where he's silver medal behind Gary. Great guy. If you ever run into him over there in Croatia, say hi to him. I'm not sure he's actually there. I think he is. What's the biggest mistake for sinking in the water in freestyle? What could be? What's the best fix for sinking in the water, if there is one? Well, the lift of the swimmer primarily comes from 2 sources: the beginning of the pull, where there's a downward force, and then the kick. The kick, every down kick has a pretty strong downward force. So those 2 parts of the kick and the pull are really what determine how high we get in the water. Remember, the higher we are on the surface, the faster we're going to go. The ideal being hydroplaning. If you could go over the top of the water like a boat, you'd break every record out there. But we don't have enough power to do that, so we want to be as high as we can. That's why the forces down, when we look at the force down, are good forces. Either way, and we're not measuring the kick with this technology, we're measuring the hand, but we can see how much downward force there is. In Artyom's case, he was actually bending the wrist back with the right hand, pressing down too much, which is generating more lift, reducing his drag, but his speed wasn't as good. So we know that it was hurting him, less propulsion, less speed, because we're looking at both now. And we know that downward force didn't help him go faster. So that's the bottom line. Is this force downward making me faster or slower? And in most cases, if you're pressing down too much, it's going to cause you to slow down, especially during the time when you should be pressing back. The other things that generate lift are air in the lungs, of course, that's important. Also just the Bernoulli effect, which is very minimal, which can happen at the beginning of the pull from the outstretched hand, where the flow of water is actually lifting the body, but it's a small effect compared to the Newtonian forces pressing down. Same person, FPS Croatia. Is it better to grab a lot of water with strength or rely on entry? They're both important. The hand entry should be fully extended. Don't drive the hand down. This is one of the things we've more recently begun to teach and understand the importance. If you look at Ahmed Hafnawi, or you look at David Popovich, they're coming up with the hand, which is really important, and they're fully extended. A lot of flyers do that, but now we're seeing it more and more in the freestylers. Also, the fingers should be together when you go in. You can't relax the hand at entry. You have to have it stiff, keeping the fingers pointing forward. Grabbing a lot of water is really dependent on strength and also opening the fingers of the hand. This is where most of the force is coming from, not from the forearm here. It's not coming from the upper arm, it's coming mostly from the hand. So once you start to press down, you want to open the hand just slightly and let the thumb come out to maximize the propulsion. Stan Zagramoff asked, should we breathe on every cycle on a 50 fly like you recommend? On the 100, absolutely not. The best way to swim a 50 fly is without a breath, with no breath. And the reason is you can get your stroke rate up much faster. The actual speed of the flyer isn't a lot different whether they breathe or they don't breathe, but the stroke rate when you don't breathe can be much faster. And that's what makes the fly faster in the 50 without breathing. Obviously, you've got the air in your lungs, so you're keeping that buoyancy and keeping the higher level, but you get the head down and you churn, you go fast. One of my top 3 swims of all time was Sarah Sjöström's 50 fly in, I think, 2015 in Sweden, where she went 24.4, which would have been a top 10 50 freestyle time that year. No one else, to my knowledge, has broken 25 in the 50 fly. Maybe somebody has since, but if they have, it wasn't by much. 62 stroke rate, nailed the finish, great start, no breath, all the way down the pool. So when you swim the 50 fly, put your head down, get your stroke rate up. 62 isn't a really pretty fast stroke rate. The fastest I've ever seen stroke rate wise in a 50 fly is 70. South American champion, I forget his name, but he was from Venezuela and 23 something way back. 70 stroke rate. He's not a tall guy. Sarah was taller than he was, so depends. The stroke rate depends on your height and the length of your arms, but you should be up in the 60s, everyone. Blue Matches, hi Gary, thanks for this great detailed analysis. It's our pleasure. We love doing this stuff, and exciting because we get to put swimmers under the microscope and we analyze them the right way, we think. We're trying to be as careful as we can not to make mistakes on either the attainment of the data or the analysis or interpretation of the data. That's easy to do, so thank you for that. We love it. We think this is going to lead to a whole different level of coaching swimming technique. There's an old saying that ignorance is bliss. If you don't know what you're missing, then you don't realize you're missing it, right? So when we uncover these mistakes and realize the magnitude of them, all of a sudden I think people and coaches around the world are going to take a whole different view of how important technique is. I think most coaches suspect it, but we haven't really documented it with the technology like this. So we're pretty thrilled about it. Zach, hello. I'm a swimmer who feels like their free and pull is quite off. When I try to pull down my body, I feel like my hips wiggle too much. They could be. I'm not seeing the end of that. I don't know if there's a continuation here.
He just says, and vice versa. Any suggestions?
Oh, vice versa. All right. So wiggling usually means you're overreaching with your hand or you're out sweeping. Remember, if we get the hand, and this is one of the things that we had Artyom test with, if you press out with the hand or in, and Newton's third law of motion is action, reaction. So outward force, the body's going to move that way. Inward force, the body's going to move the other way. So if you're wiggling down the pool, you're probably out sweeping or in sweeping or both. And you don't want to look like an iguana going down the pool. You want to look straight down that pool. That's why we enter the hand straight out from the shoulder, not over the middle of the head. If you're coming over too far, you have to outsweep to get your hand back in the pulling motion position. So usually the wiggle occurs from one of those three things, either overreaching, out sweeping or in sweeping. That's pretty much it. The kick per se doesn't really make you go crooked unless you're doing something really funky and different. But most of the time, the kick is not the problem. It's the pull and where the hand is being entered that causes the wiggling of the body.
Blue Matches here.
So Blue Matches asks, I heard that one elite swimmer takes advantage of the Archimedes push after starting turns. When they dolphin kick, Phelps seem to go deeper than the others after the turn, the push. Well, we've tested the concept of whether you glide or whether you don't glide off of a wall, I think 5 or 6 times. I've lost count because every time I do it, coaches say it can't be right. And it's almost heresy to talk about not gliding off a wall because every coach out there, almost across the board, thinks you're better off with a short glide, but you're not. And Phelps, somebody showed me a video from the 2012 Olympics on the relay, 800 relay. It was done by a Japanese camera. You can find it on YouTube. It's a Japanese company, and they really focused in on Phelps for the whole 200. I mean, up close and personal. And they see really every turn, and you can see his up kick off the wall. Every single wall is immediate. And I think Bob Bowman taught Michael Phelps to do that years ago and suspected that everybody else was wrong, and he just up kicked right away. He goes deeper on the turn because he's taking 7 kicks to break out. And in backstroke, guys like Ryan Murphy, they're 10 kicks to break out, usually to 15 meters, and then they take 8 strokes to the wall, short course. But you have to go deep because you got the air in your lungs, and you're keeping that air in your lungs. And if you don't go down, you hit the surface sooner than you want to. Most of us who come off the wall and we take 2 or 3 kicks, we don't want to go down there and come back. We want to go straight off the wall, take those kicks, and get up and start swinging. So the depth or the angle which you push off the wall really depends on the number of kicks you're going to take. You don't want to blow the air out of your lungs either because you want to keep the buoyancy, and you want to wait till the very last, or if you breathe on the first stroke or the second stroke, you want to burst exhale so you keep that buoyancy in your lungs. Let's see.
That was just a continuation of the question.
Okay, he's continuing the question. Is it true? Why does it make them go faster? Okay, so let me give you because the velocity meter really shows why you're better off taking an up kick right away off the wall. And by the way, the first kick off the wall is not a down kick, it's really an up kick. The feet, like Artem's case, he actually pressed down a little bit with his feet coming off the wall, but he immediately went back up. Why do you do that? Well, first of all, when you come off the wall, there's this huge vortex or slipstream of water following you. You're pushing off the wall somewhere between 2 and 3 meters, or even more. Some are over 3 meters per second, which is really fast. And you come off that wall with a body that's not streamlined, and you bring a stream of water behind you. So what you're doing is you're kicking up into that stream with your legs, and you get acceleration from that. So when you see the velocity, it starts to come down. It peaks right when the toes leave the wall. The acceleration peaks when the legs are extending. That's when the maximum force is, not when the toes leave the wall. The force is over by that time. But the velocity peaks right as the toes leave the wall. And then because there's no more propulsion, the speed starts coming down. And it comes down in relationship to how well the swimmer is streamlined and how fast they're going, and how much drag their body generates or causes from whatever position they can get into. But then you start to kick. Okay, well, you start an up kick, you actually hold the speed more constant. And then you start to bend the knees, and then speed comes down again. So when you take a kick immediately off the wall, you bend the knee less than you do when you take a short glide. And if you take a long glide, the bend is really excessive. So when you look at not only the timing of the first kick, remember the speed is coming down regardless if there's no kick. When you take that first knee bend early, you drop to a certain trough velocity, which is not that low. It's above 1 meter per second. If you take a little bit longer, you bend more, you drop below 1 meter per second. The trough goes lower. And if you go really long and you take that huge bend, you drop down to almost 0. And then they're starting from a dead stop. And then you're not taking advantage of the law of inertia. You're not sustaining your speed. It takes more energy. Bottom line, it's slower. So that's the reason is you catch that vortex on the up kick. You sustain your velocity more by moving the legs up through the vortex. You don't bend them as much on that early kick, so you don't lose as much, and your trough is higher, and your average speed for 5 meters, which is just past the flags, is faster, is greater than it is when you delay the kick. All right, so that's what we teach, and more people are starting to do it and get it. How do you fix bobbing and backstroke? Bobbing and backstroke is usually caused I mean, first of all, let me explain something. In backstroke, you want to lay the shoulder. You don't want to lay the head back, and you don't want to tilt the head very far forward. The head can be slightly tilted, slightly, not up here. That's reading in bed. But pretty much the head stays in alignment. You arch the shoulder back when the hand enters the water, and then you come up for breath, and you arch. So there is always some upward and downward, what I call a mini crunch motion in backstroke. That's what you want. You don't want to come way up here and then way back there. You just want up enough to get the breath and down enough so the head goes underwater. So you see the bow wave come over the top of the face. Now, I see a lot of people do a lot more bobbing than that. Part of the bobbing can be caused by pressing down at the beginning of the pull with the hand once it's into water and lifting the head and everything up too high. You just don't want a lot of that motion. You want a minimal amount of up and down motion, but most people who swim backstroke love to read in bed because they're more aware of where they are. Their head's too high, they're tilted forward too much. Their feet never break the surface on the kick, and they go down the pool like that, okay? Not a good idea. So if you want to go fast, you got to get your hips up, which means shoulders back, bow wave over the top of the head. That means you submerge your head underwater, which is very important, losing that surface drag. Not pressing down at the beginning of the pull, lifting you up too much. So, and concentrate on getting your toes to the surface. All the great backstrokers have a foam of water behind them from their toes breaking the surface. The whole foot isn't coming out, but the toe does, and you should get those toes out on the kick. Martina Junger asks, how do you get one arm to pull harder than the other arm so that both arms pull equally hard? You can't always tell just looking at the swimmer that one arm is more propulsive than the other. That's one of the things we're learning by doing this smart paddle test. Well, it's not always about the strength of the arm, and like in Artyom's case, his dominant arm had less of a spike than his weaker arm. Now, he's right-handed, but he's getting more peak, stronger pull, greater impulse, average propulsion with his left hand. It's not about the strength, I don't think. It's about the position of the hand and the way he's pressing down as opposed to backward. I think if he corrects that right hand, and by the way, he's already working on that. He's training now for World Championships. He's going to go a couple tenths faster than his best time was on this video. I think he's got room to go 21 mid, 21.6, 21.7. His best is 22.2, I think. But he's got to learn how to pull correctly. Strong arm, weak arm doesn't matter. If you're pulling incorrectly, you're not going to get the same propulsion. Now, are there people where one arm is just definitely stronger than the other? Absolutely. The other thing is sometimes you have an injury or you can't pull with as much force on one side and the other. Those things are going to happen. But it's nice to identify it when we know it's weaker on one side and try to fix that problem, focusing on a drill that's going to focus on where that problem occurs and getting it corrected. One of the most common problems I saw with Dean Ferris when he was here. Dean was 129, 200 freestyler, right in the middle of his pull, lifting the hand, losing his grip on that pressure backward, that press backward right in the middle, just with the left hand. And you saw his velocity right down. So everyone, including the Olympians, the greatest swimmers in the world, are all making mistakes. We just got to be good enough to catch them, figure out what they are, how badly they're hurting. All right, let's take another question here. Mary, Trin, what breathing would you recommend for the 100 IM regarding the breathing for the free and the fly lap? Well, it's a good question. Normally, 100 IM is really 425s, and I almost think of the 100 IM as even more than a sprint than any of the other. I don't consider any of the hundreds a sprint. They're really not, because you're sustaining the same stroke and technique for 425s, and the end of that race is very aerobic. But in a 100 IM, it's almost like 425, 4 sprint 25s, a little different. Very dependent on really having great turns and transitions. Obviously, in your 100 IM, you want to really nail that crossover transition way faster. Whether you do a full pullout or a dolphin kicking up, that's another topic of discussion. We're going to have a whole show on that one because we think the dolphin kicking up may be just as fast or faster in some athletes. But anyway, going back to your question, how would I breathe? I wouldn't take that many breaths on the fly, but I'd take a few. I wouldn't breathe every cycle, and I wouldn't breathe 2 up, 1 down. I'd probably take a couple of breaths, but maybe 1. In fact, I'm sure that someone like Caleb could do it. In fact, in the 100 IM, we did a show on him. Do you remember if he took a breath in the fly?
I think he was on the fly. I think he took maybe 1.
So when Caleb Dressel broke the world record 100-meter IM, may have taken 1 breath if he did. But it's fast stroke rate, and you got to get there quickly, and you got to not breathe in order to get the stroke rate up. So you don't breathe very much. Backstroke, obviously, you're breathing. Breaststroke, you're breathing. When you get to free, he actually, you're pretty exhausted by then, and you need that aerobic energy. So he came off, and he kicked. I think he took, 6 kicks to breakout on the freestyle of that leg, and he went into a breath every cycle until he got to about 8 meters from the wall, puts the head down, and then no breath to the wall. So in reality, because he's out close to 10, 12 meters when he breaks out, he's not taking that many strokes, but he did breathe, and then head down into the wall. So the answer is you breathe as little as possible, but it's 100. At the end of that freestyle, you're gonna have to breathe some. You can't go 13 meters into the wall in that freestyle, I don't think, without a breath. But, everybody's different, their aerobic system's different. My advice to you in 100 IM is think of it as 425 sprints with great turns, spin turns on your fly to back and your breast to free. Don't go vertically, go down, compress your body, get around quickly, do the crossover turn, and get your stroke rate up. You got to be high stroke rate. Your stroke rate on the breaststroke in Caleb's case was, I think, close to 60. He was way up there, fast stroke rate. And his fly stroke rate, I'm just doing this by memory now, but I think it was probably 60-ish on that. And then the freestyle, his backstroke was 111. I remember that, and his freestyle was like 115 stroke rate. So every 25 is swum like it's a 50 sprint. All right. FPS Croatian freestyle, should we always look straight at the bottom, or are there exceptions? It's a great question because we teach straight at the bottom, but it's one of those things in swimming, every technique we teach has a good side and a bad side. In history, you can go back and you can find some pretty amazing swimmers like Ian Thorpe, Federica Pellegrini, who really swim with their heads tilted forward. And it makes me wonder is if we could take them and reteach them with their head down, would they be faster or would they be slower? In general, we think the drag is more important than the propulsion. When your head is tilted forward, you probably get a little more propulsion, but you have more drag. When your head is down, the drag is less, but the propulsion is probably a little bit less too. It's one of those things where you have to look at it, test it, and when you test it both ways, but it's not a simple answer. You never tilt the head very far forward, ever. And if you do, it's not in a 50 and probably not in a 100. You see all those guys with their heads down. You don't see anybody win a 50 with their head tilted forward. So in the distance races or middle distance, 200, 400, sometimes you find guys, less so today. Most of the swimmers who swim the 200 and 100 are in a hybrid freestyle, a galloping or loping freestyle, and they come off the breath and they really bury their head. They get underwater, and that's why they surge, because they got rid of that surface drag. They're a submarine, and they go fast. They come with a strong surge kick, strong pull, and a lot of coupling energy coming down with a strong arm and a strong head turn, strong body rotation. All right. I'm a 13-year-old who's a breaststroker right now, so 100 breast and 124. 5'3". Do I have potential to be a high-level breaststroker and swimmer, or not really?
Those are his too.
I train 8 times a week. The one thing I will say about breaststroke is that it's a lot more forgiving on the height than other strokes. you're going to be a 50 freestyler. I mean, Caleb's 6'2". That's not exactly super tall, but you're not short either. You're not 5'3", and you're 13. I don't know what you're going to grow to be. Some people grow late. It's not going to hurt you as much in breaststroke. There's been some amazingly great breaststrokers. One of from your country, Fred de Bourgois, who won the Olympics back in '96. He wasn't a very tall guy. I don't know what he was, but maybe 5'10". You can look it up. Ed Moses, great breaststroker back in 2000 in the U.S. He was not tall. He was 5'10", I think. Kitajima, classic example. I think Kitajima is 5'9". Amazing breaststroker. So you don't have to be as tall in breaststroke, so that gives you that advantage. Why is that? Because it's really a kick-dependent stroke, and it's a lot of the propulsion's coming from the legs, so you don't need that arm span, that wingspan, necessarily to be fast in breaststroke. So
he was 5'9".
Fred de Bourgois was 5'9". I got my statistician, who's from Belgium. He's just the pride of Belgium. He's the last guy to win an Olympic gold medal from Belgium, and that was a while ago. You don't see that happen very often, but he wasn't very tall. I was there and watched him. A great start, by the way. He killed everybody in the start. Tremendous explosion. That's one thing you do need with breaststroke is fast twitch, fast leg cycle, fast kick cycle, especially to do power breaststroke today. Speed breaststroke. Adam Peaty, he's really redefined breaststroke. Lily King. Tatiana, new breaststroke technique, late breath. My other question is, same person, this is Zach. One thing I'm really frustrated in swimming is my kick. I sit on my ankles, do flexibility, and for some reason, I'm the slowest in my group in all kicks except breaststroke. Well, oftentimes when you have breaststroke tools, which it sounds like you do, you don't get the freestyle tools. You don't get both sets. Some do, but you got to sit on the tops of those feet. Do it 2 and 20 every day. 2 minutes on the tops of your feet, knees up in the air, and then 20 freestyle squat push-ups. You can find them on our videos, lane 2 and 3, lane 3, I think. Watch that video, do that every day, and then that's the first step because you're building a better tool to do freestyle or dolphin kick or backstroke kick. But then you got to build the fitness in the leg extent or the hip extensors and hip flexors, in the knee extensors, the quads, the calf muscles. You got to build the strength and fitness to be able to sustain that motion over and over and over again. Do you have to have huge feet? You probably don't have huge feet at 5'3". I don't think. I would guess. It's not as important as you might think. Natalie Coughlin, fastest kicker, I think, recorded at USA Swimming in Colorado Springs, didn't have bigger feet than Michael Phelps, but she could outkick him, not by much, but she was the fastest kicker ever recorded up there. At least she was a few years ago. But anyway, so the feet, it's more about the ankle flexibility, the leg strength, and the fitness to sustain those motions. Why is it? I've copied my friend kick rate, kick with the same bend. It's all about angles. It's about, there's a lot of mechanics involved in the kick. You got to get it right. You got to be strong, and those ankles have to turn in as you come down. When you come down, use the tops of your feet as a propulsion, pressing through the body vortex and kicking against the foot vortex at the initiation. And then on the way up, they press straight back and use the bottom of your foot and the back of your leg to press up to get propulsion. Most of the propulsion on the freestyle kick occurs as the two feet pass each other right at that point. One's going up and the other's going down through the body vortex. But, it's like anything, there's an art to it, and the more they turn in, the more you can pass through that body vortex sideways on the way down, the more propulsion you're going to get. It's interesting that some people, we get the most propulsion at the beginning of the down kick, catching the foot vortex, and others we see the most propulsion coming or generated through the body vortex. Probably more the latter than the former. But you can get it in either place, or both if you're fast.
Last question.
Last question. For aspiring swimming coach, what book or source of information is best out there in your opinion? I'm going to sound selfish in saying this, but get our book. It's called Fundamentals of Fast Swimming. You can get it on Amazon. If you live in Croatia, it's the best way to get it. It's cheaper. If you order it from us and we have to ship it there, it costs too much. Our copies are a little better, and we sign them, autograph them. You don't care about that. You're more interested in the inside of the book and what's in there. It's great material. We just published it a year and a half ago. It's brand new, called Fundamentals of Fast Swimming. You can find it on Amazon. Just search for it, order a copy. You'll learn a lot from that book. You'll get into my brain and figure out what we've learned about this sport in 60 years. Most of it in the last 8 or 10 since we've achieved and been able to attain our technology and learned how to use it. All right, I think that's it for questions. Thank you all for joining us this week. It was fun, a great topic, a great subject in Artium, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another show for you. So stay tuned, and I hope you catch us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to join up as a member of Lane 2 or 3 in our subscription on our website. Go to theraceclub.com, hit membership, and join Lane 3. That's everything we have. All of our articles. We now have over 400 videos, over 300 articles, all pertaining, not all, but most pertaining to swimming technique. There's a lot of training videos in there as well. So thanks again. We appreciate your loyalty and your interest in the Race Club, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Bye.